Someone stops behind your chair. You don't look up, you keep typing. But something in your posture shifts. Your sentences come out a little tighter, and the part of you that was slouching straightens without asking your permission. Then they walk away, and you slump. There is a famous name for what just happened to you. Psychologists call it the Hawthorne effect. The idea that people work harder simply because they know they are being watched. It is in the textbooks. It is on the training slides at your job. For most of a century, it has shaped how thousands of experiments were designed. But the real answer is far stranger. Because the experiment it is named after almost certainly never showed that at all. Go back to 1924. Cicero, Illinois, just outside Chicago. A vast factory called the Hawthorne Works, owned by Western Electric, where thousands of workers assemble telephone equipment. The electric power industry wants to prove something profitable, that brighter lights make workers more productive. So the researchers run an experiment. They turn the lights up, they turn the lights down, they measure the output. The story you have been told goes like this. Every single time the lighting changed, productivity rose. Brighter, output climbed. Dimmer, output climbed. Even when the room grew so dark the workers could barely see their hands, they kept getting faster. Nothing mattered except one thing. Someone was watching them. It is a beautiful story. It is the kind of finding that quietly reorganizes how you think about people. It says that the human being is not a machine you optimize with better equipment. It says the human being is a creature that responds to being noticed. And for 75 years, nobody checked it. The illumination data was never formally analyzed. It was thought to be lost, possibly destroyed. The story simply circulated on its own, cited by researchers who had read other researchers who had read a summary. Then, two economists went looking for it. Stephen Levitt and John List tracked down the original records, and in 2011, they published what those records actually contained. It was not the legend. The dramatic patterns everybody had described, every lighting change lifting output, the darkness making people faster, were not in the data. Levitt and List chose a blunt word for the popular descriptions. Fictional. Not exaggerated, not misremembered. Fictional. They did find fainter, subtler hints that being observed had some effect. But the story that had launched 1,000 experiments was, in its famous form, simply not in the numbers. So where did the name come from? Not from the factory floor. Nobody working there in 1924 called it the Hawthorne effect. The phrase surfaces in the 1950s, decades after the fact, and the interpretation locked into place when the sociologist Henry Landsberger revisited the studies in 1958 and offered the tidy explanation everybody has repeated ever since. The novelty of being studied, the attention itself, that is what makes people perform. A phrase invented in hindsight, attached to data nobody had read, describing an effect that may not have been there. Which leaves an uncomfortable question. If the watching did not make those workers faster, what did it do to them? The Hawthorne studies did not end with the lights. Harvard sent in the psychologist Elton Mayo. The research stretched on until 1932, and in the final phase, investigators sat down inside a room with 14 men who wired telephone switching equipment and simply watched them, openly, for months. Those men were paid by the piece. The more they produced, the more they earned. Every incentive in the room pointed the same direction. They slowed down. The group had quietly agreed on what a fair day's work looked like, and they held that line together. A man who worked too fast was called a rate buster, and he was ridiculed until he drifted back to the pack. A man who worked too slow was called a chiseler, and he was pressured the other way. They suspected that if they showed management how fast they could really go, management would raise the target and cut the pay. So they protected each other. Under direct, constant observation, they produced less than they were capable of. Sit with that for a second. The single most famous claim to come out of the Hawthorne studies, that being watched makes you work harder, was contradicted inside the Hawthorne studies themselves. The men in that room were not lazy, and they were not stupid. They were reading the situation. They understood exactly what a watched person risks by revealing everything they can do. Being watched did not make those men more productive, it made them more careful. And careful, not harder, is what you actually become. In 2006, at Newcastle University, three researchers named Melissa Bateson, Daniel Nettle, and Gilbert Roberts did something almost absurdly simple. In a staff coffee room, there was an honesty box where people were trusted to drop in their own money for tea and coffee. Above the box, the researchers taped a small price list. Each week, they changed the image printed across the top of it. One week, a photograph of flowers. The next week, a pair of human eyes looking straight out. Nothing else in the room changed. No person was watching. Everyone could see it was a picture. On the weeks with the eyes, people paid nearly 3 times as much. Since then, other researchers have tried to repeat that result, and the findings have been genuinely mixed. Some studies find the eyes work, some find nothing at all. The honest state of the science is that the effect is small, fragile, and still argued over. But notice what the argument is about. Nobody is arguing about whether a drawing of eyes can make you feel seen. They are arguing about how much. Because you already knew the answer. You knew it long before anyone taped a picture above a coffee box. You know it from the way your spine straightens at approaching footsteps, from the way a security camera changes your walk even when you have done nothing wrong, from the way you rehearse a sentence silently in your head before you let yourself say it out loud. Why would a photograph of eyes reach something that deep? Because your ancestors lived for hundreds of thousands of years in groups of a few dozen people, where your reputation was not a luxury, it was survival. Being known as a cheat was not embarrassing, it was fatal. Exile from the group meant no food, no shelter, no protection, no children. So your brain learned to keep a constant background estimate of who might be watching and to adjust you before you noticed. That estimate is still running right now, and it does not care in the slightest that the eyes above the coffee box are made of ink. So, the Hawthorne effect, as it is usually told to you, may be a story about an experiment that never quite happened, but the thing buried underneath it is real and far older than any factory. Observation does not switch on some hidden reserve of effort inside you. It switches on the part of you that is always, quietly, asking a single question. How does this look? Someone stops behind your chair. You don't look up, you keep typing. And those tidier sentences arriving on the screen were never really about the work in front of you. They were about the person behind you, and they have been for 100,000 years.